Welcome to this series on the post-harvest handling of fresh fruit, vegetables and cut flowers presented to you by the Post-Harvest Academy. My name is Dr. Charles Whitehead and I am your post-harvest professor, helping you to improve your proficiency in the handling of fresh produce so you can better meet the increasing demand for quality fresh fruit, vegetables and cut flowers in markets throughout the world. In this series, we are going to look at a number of very interesting topics, such as the necessity for a basic knowledge of post-harvest physiology and handling, the composition of perishable commodities, pre-harvest factors affecting post-harvest changes, important structural, physiological, biochemical, and physicochemical changes during ripening and senescence, quality attributes of fresh produce, harvesting, packing and packaging, storage, transport, other post-harvest treatments such as ripening, irradiation and heat treatment, fresh cut produce, and finally cut flower senescence and preservation. In part 1 of this series, we are going to look at the necessity for a basic knowledge of post-harvest physiology and handling of fresh produce and cut flowers. The cultivation and marketing of fresh produce play an important role in the world economy and maintenance of a good quality of life. Cultivation of fruits, vegetables and cut flowers of outstanding quality must always be the aim for the successful marketing of perishable products. In addition, each role player in the various sectors of the fresh produce industry must have a good working knowledge of the many factors that determine the quality of fresh produce. Such knowledge is essential to ensure that good quality products are sent to local and export markets and to reduce post-harvest losses to a minimum. Early human populations obtained food mainly through hunting and gathering. This hunter-gatherer lifestyle resulted in small human populations with a slow growth rate due to the demands placed on them by the mobile way of life and methods of subsistence. The migration patterns of these hunter-gatherers were seasonal in nature and had little impact on the environment due to the low population density and limited exploits of many diverse resources. Such a wandering way of life offered little opportunity for technological and economic development. Pastoralism emerged out of hunting and gathering approximately 10,000 years ago, with a large-scale domestication of goats in the Zagros highlands of the western Iran and northeastern Iraq. The pastoral lifestyle did not differ much from that of the hunter-gatherers, while herd and human populations swelled and contracted according to climatic conditions. Pastoral nomads moved around continuously with their herds and flocks in search of new pastures, and their migration patterns were determined by rainfall and availability of grazing. Agriculture developed parallel with pastoralism approximately 10,000 years ago with the domestication and cultivation of einkorn wheat in the Karakadak highlands of southeast Turkey. From there it spread in concentric circles throughout Asia, Africa and Europe. Agriculture was made possible by a global rise in temperature after the end of the previous ice age that began about 100,000 years ago and peaked about 20,000 years ago. 17,000 years ago, the average temperature was about 8 degrees Celsius lower than the current temperature. Over the course of 6,000 years, the average temperature increased to the levels favorable for the successful production of agricultural crops. But it wasn't only the rise in temperature that made agriculture possible. The onset of the rise in temperature about 17,000 years ago was followed by a rise in the average carbon dioxide level that started about 16,000 years ago, 1,000 years after the onset of the rise in temperature. Prior to that, the average carbon dioxide levels fluctuated around 180 to 225 parts per million for the duration of the previous ice age. These levels were too low for successful agriculture. Plants require a minimum level of 150 parts per million carbon dioxide to survive. Between 150 and 225 parts per million, growth is very slow. Domestication of crop plants started around 10,000 years ago, when the average carbon dioxide level was around 260 parts per million. For the past 1,000 years, the carbon dioxide level stayed around 280 parts per million until 1850, when it started to rise to the current levels of 400 parts per million. The earliest domestication of crop plants occurred about 10,500 years ago with the domestication of einkorn wheat in the Karakadak highlands of southeastern Turkey. The common ancestor of modern cereals are still found on the slopes of Mount Karaka. Since then, numerous other crops have been domesticated all over the world. For example, about 9,000 years ago, the domestication of maize started in southern Mexico, and the domestication of peaches started about 7,500 years ago in the Yangtze River Valley in China, and the domestication of banana occurred about 7,000 years ago in Southeast Asia. Agriculture resulted in a sedentary lifestyle characterized by permanent settlement in a specific geographic region, intensive cultivation of the land, and development of different crop plants. This type of lifestyle replaced hunting and gathering and led to drastic changes in the way of life. It brought about a rapid development in technology and formed the basis of modern civilization. The sedentary lifestyle also resulted in the development of villages and cities in which people were grouped together and experienced less pressure from environmental limitations. Storage was one of the earliest technologies to develop after the domestication of cereal grains. Grains were stored in a number of ways, such as in clay pots and in granaries. The development of pastoralism and agriculture resulted in a greater accessibility to abundant food. Together with the development of various technologies, this led to an increase in world population. At first, this increase occurred gradually, but since the early 1950s, the world population exploded exponentially to the current levels of 8 billion. Together with the rise in agriculture, technology, and world population came an increase in urbanization. The number of urbanized people first exceeded the rural population in 2007. According to the World Bank, some 56% of the world's population today live in cities. That is about 4.4 billion people. It is expected that by 2050, 7 out of 10 people will live in cities. The explosive rise in world population and urbanization resulted in a massive increase in demand for food, which caused a hunger problem in some regions of the world. More than 1 billion people in developing countries are undernourished. These people are found largely in Asia and sub-Saharan Africa. Due to poverty, more than 2 billion people are subjected to food insecurity. Food insecurity can mainly be ascribed to disproportionate distribution and inadequate production, and soaring food prices driven by a mixture of increased demand, wastage and post-harvest losses, increased speculation, climate changes, demand for biofuels, and epidemics. Post-harvest losses of fresh fruit and vegetables contribute to a great extent to food insecurity. About 30% of the world's population, of the world's food is wasted annually. Almost 50% of fruit and vegetables produced are wasted. Of this, about 10% is lost during the post-harvest phase. Most of the post-harvest losses in developing countries occur at post-harvest handling and processing levels. Most of the post-harvest losses in industrialized countries occur at retail and consumer level. According to the FAO, the optimal threshold of fruit losses is around 5%, which is much lower than the current levels of food losses. Approximately 45% of the annual world production of fruit and vegetables are lost during the post-harvest period before it reaches the consumer. This translates to an annual loss of about 930 million metric tons globally. Post-harvest losses of fresh fruits and vegetables are generally much lower in developed countries than in developing ones. In developed countries, the post-harvest loss of all fresh vegetables range from 5 to 15%, compared to 20 to 50% in developing countries. Similarly, the post-harvest loss of all fresh fruit is much less in developed countries than in developing countries. In developed countries, it's less than 10% compared to more than 20% in developing countries. These disparities are driven by differences in infrastructure, technology adoption, quality standards, and market access. Solutions to the inadequate food supply include increased food production by 50 to 70%. This can be achieved by increasing the acreage under production and intensifying production of existing cropland. Reducing food losses and food wastage is an important factor that is often overlooked. To do so requires important knowledge of the post-harvest physiology and technology in the handling chain. The purpose of this series is to help you to improve your proficiency in the handling of fresh produce so you can better meet the increased demand to reduce the loss of fresh produce and increase the availability of quality fresh fruit, vegetables, and cut flowers. Due to their highly perishable nature, the post-harvest handling of fresh produce presents a unique challenge to the fresh produce industry. The post-harvest handling of fresh produce is much more complicated than that of grain. The major reasons for that are outlined in this table. Fresh perishable commodities have a high moisture content ranging from 70 to 95%. That means that they are soft and have a high rate of metabolism. The unit size is also large, ranging from 5 grams to 5 kilograms. That means that they must be handled with special care to avoid unnecessary damage. Due to their high rate of metabolism, they also have a high rate of heat production, which means that they require storage, transport, and display at low temperatures to extend their post-harvest life to an acceptable period. Their soft texture means that extra care must be taken in their handling from harvest to consumption. As a result of the above, the longevity of perishable commodities is short, ranging from a few days to a few months. Post-harvest losses is mostly caused by rotting, damage, and senescence. In contrast, grains and seeds have a low rate of metabolism, are much smaller in size, are hard, and have a low rate of heat production. Their post-harvest losses are mainly caused by mold, rodents, and insects. This means that grains are easier to handle and store, and that their longevity is much longer than that of perishable commodities. In the rest of this series, we will focus on the post-harvest physiology and handling of perishable commodities. In part 2, we will look at the derivation of fruit and vegetables from different plant organs and tissues. For more information on specific commodities, please visit our website at www.postharvestacademy.net.